Okay, so this is a continuation of our discussion of Descartes' second meditation. We didn't have time to talk about Descartes' famous example of the wax earlier today, so we're going to continue the discussion with this brief video. This is all in service of Descartes' general argument that our minds and our bodies are separate things. And we'll remember that Descartes told us that you are fundamentally a thinking thing. That is, you are the kind of being that thinks, wills, doubts, denies. And simply in virtue of the fact that you do these sorts of things, you know that you exist. And these facts about you don't seem to have anything to do with the fact that you are a material being with a body. Descartes helpfully, just like he tells us that the essence of thinking, or the essence of mental substance is thinking, he's also going to tell us what the essence of material things are, the essence of material substance. In this passage, where he says that by body we understand that it's capable of being bounded by some shape, of being enclosed in a place, filling up space to exclude other body. He's basically saying here that these things that are perceivable by our senses are what we call extension or extended things. So for Descartes, this is a central move, right? The essence of mind is thinking. That is things like thinking, willing, denying, doubting, sensing. But the essence of material things is to be a thing in space. So that's what Descartes means by extension. So whereas he now realizes that, according to his meditation, he is a thinking being, he used to think that he was this kind of bodily thing. Or some sort of mixture or union of the mind and body. But the more that he thinks about it, the more he thinks that, well, we actually don't know material things in the same way that we know mental things. And this brings us to the example of the wax. So Descartes says that he's dealing with a piece of wax straight from the honeycomb, and it has a whole bunch of sensible properties to it, right? So he points out that it smells like flowers. If you were to put it in his mouth, it would taste a bit sweet like honey. That it is, for instance, of a certain shape, of a certain solidity, it has a certain texture to it, all these qualities. And the thought here, and a thought that a lot of people who are impressed with an empiricist line of thought, they're going to say, well, the thing that we know the most and most clearly is through the senses. Descartes points out you can take this piece of wax and you can change every single one of its sensible properties. So you can put it under yet another flame, you can melt it all away, and what was once of a certain shape and of a certain texture, it changes the shape and texture. It no longer smells like flowers, it's no longer sweet. He even suggests that the configuration of its extension might change quite a bit. So for instance, it might actually be a different volume than it once was. But here's the interesting thing that Descartes points out, is that even though every single one of its sensible features changes, he still thinks that he knows that we are dealing with the same piece of wax that we were dealing with before. So no empirical property, that is, no sensible property of the wax changes. Let's repeat that. No sensible property of the wax stays the same. You still recognize that it is the same thing that it was before. So in this way, Descartes even suggests that what we're doing is we're going beyond the senses when we think about what the wax really is, the thing itself, the substance that it is. And in this way, he even says, like, look, we can think about the wax itself, or the wax in general, stripped naked of all of its sensible empirical properties, right? So he says here, since I know that even bodies are not properly speaking perceived by the senses or the faculty of imagination, but by the intellect alone, they are not perceived through their being touched or seen. We'll just flag one part of this passage. When Descartes is talking about imagination, he's saying this is our mental representations of sensible things. So he's using the word imagination in a very strict and narrow sense here. And what he's saying is you don't perceive bodies simply or straightforwardly through just sensing them, right? You have to have sense perceptions, perhaps, but in order to recognize a material thing as itself, you have to understand your senses. And in this way, he's saying, look, even when you're perceiving material things, you still have to fundamentally know these things through your mind rather than your senses. He even suggests that, well, if you're saying that I know that there is a piece of wax here because it appears to me as having properties A, B, and C, solid, smells like flowers, tastes like honey. He says, well, you have to be certain of your mind and your perceptions first, and only after you interpret your perceptions do you actually perceive a material thing. So that's the big takeaway, it seems, from the wax example, is that in Descartes' epistemology, he's going to say, especially when we contrast our knowledge of our minds with our knowledge of material things, we know our minds best and first, and even when it comes to perceiving the material extended world, our mind is making a significant contribution, perhaps a more important contribution than that made by the senses all on their own. So that's just a brief discussion of Descartes and the wax example in service of this broader project that he has of, remember, demonstrating that the mind is distinct from the body, and eventually he'll also argue that God exists, again, in this demonstrative method that aims at knowing things for certain. So thanks for tuning in to this discussion of the wax example, and I'll look forward to continuing the conversation soon. Take care.